another quote from you that I wanted to ask you about and unpack a little bit. I think we talked a little bit about the white reader, but you mentioned the cheerful privilege of the white reader. And this is a phrase I had not come across before, but I love it. So if you would, what does that mean? What is the cheerful privilege of the white reader?
Could you remind me where I said this?
On the website where no is the answer. On the Liam No site. But where no, because I've been listening to multiple podcasts with you and
Right.
reading multiple sites.
Because I think whenever I'm talking about race, particularly, I think it's useful. It's always useful to put things in context and to know what I was saying and what I was talking about. So I think that phrase, the cheerful privilege of the right reader, I would guess that when I was talking about it, I think the privilege of the white reader is to some extent always think of yourself as a blank slate, and to think of yourself as as the default. You know, like when you're reading a book and no matter you're reading a book and another character walks on screen, is the character's race named? If it is not named, then 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, it's usually safe to assume that character is white, because we assume that people look like us. I think quite often that's what we're projecting, and unless we are given evidence to the contrary, like a boy with dark skin walks onto the page or whatever, that is how the white reader tends to default in their thinking. And that is a privilege. That I mean that's an example of white privilege, I will say. I hesitate to say it in the way that is a privilege, because I feel like there's a better word than privilege. Although it's not coming to me. Like that is a
almost like a learned behavior, something in that neighborhood.
What? I'm sorry?
Like a learned behavior, something in that neighborhood.
Behavior. It's I was gonna say it's an unfair advantage. It's an unfair advantage to always be centered. It's an unfair advantage to always think of yourself as the center of the story. You know, and to quite often always be the center of the story. Because when you are always the center of the story, then you don't I mean, I think the classic person who is always the center of the story is Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump has not had to be the sideline of anybody else's story for his entire life. You know, he is always he's obviously like the worst and most curdled and cartoonishly bad version of that. But like,
you don't think he's just so happy always being the star?
Oh, sure. It's very easy to be happy always being the center of attention. It's very easy.
I don't think he's been happy a day in his life. That's very facetious, that question.
But it's very easy to be, but it very easily can make you a terrible person too. And I think quite often with white people, it's very easy for us not to pay attention to anybody else because we get to be the center of the story so easily. And I mean, there are hundreds of Black writers and writers of color who've talked about all this much more eloquently than I can or will, but that we when I say cheerful privilege, it is a happy privilege. You know, it is a lucky, ignorant thing. You're just in this little happy bubble, and you don't really have to pay attention to anything else. But I think if there's anything we have seen in the last few years, and I think that white people more and more are recognizing, it's that for the health of the world, especially for the health of this poor country of ours, we need to burst that bubble a little bit more. We need to be more cognizant of the world beyond ourselves, and engage with that more. And so, I mean, one of the things I'll say is, like, I learned a lot from, I've learned about this a lot from my authors, especially the authors of color who I've worked with. I always think about Oleg Dumasola Rude Perkovich, who I published her first book, 8th grade Super Zero, when I was at Scholastic. And I learned a ton from working with her, in part because she would call me on this, like on the page. Like if I, like, there was one point on the, there's one point where her characters were walking down the street and they went into a Chinese restaurant in Brooklyn and they got French fries. And the copy editor said, should we explain to people, like, that people don't think of, in other parts of the country, people don't think of kids going into Chinese restaurants and getting French fries. Like, that's not a thing. You would go into Chinese restaurants and get maybe crab rangoon or something, although that's also not a real Chinese thing. But it is a totally normal thing in New York. Like, there's lots of Chinese restaurants that'll sell you like a $1 packet of French fries. And so I think either the copy editor or I said to Bimmy, like we said, should we explain to readers what's going on here? You know, like you could buy French fries for $1 or something, and to how, like. And I was thinking specifically of like people like me in Kansas City, Missouri, as a kid, would have been very confused by that whole reference, like, and think that somebody had made a mistake, that these kids were buying French fries in a Chinese restaurant. And I said, I think I wrote a note to Bimmy that was like, would you be willing to amend the text slightly to explain this? And she wrote back, I won't, this isn't gospel, but she wrote back something like, no, because I'm not writing for white girls. And this is not what she did not say, white girls, but she said, I'm not writing for kids in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm writing for Black kids in Brooklyn, and Black kids in Brooklyn will know that you can buy French fries in the Chinese restaurant. And that was a big lesson to me as a editor. And it's still something I think about, like when I am querying writers, like, who is the person that we are writing for? How wide do we want to cast our net informationally? Like to some extent, like there are some writers who might say, like, sure, I'm willing to explain that because, you know, it doesn't make a big difference. Like some writers might feel like it doesn't make a big difference to explain it. And other writers feel like, no, it's betraying my audience to explain it. And so who are we going for here? How can we reach? Do we want to reach the most people, or do we want to reach the specific slice of people? Like, these are all questions that I think about all the time and wrestle with all the time, and wrestle with my authors on the page, you know, or like us trying to define who are we writing for? What are we doing? Who are we publishing for? All those
compromise with like a footnote. Dear Missouri girls, just so you know, in Brooklyn.
Well, sometimes people do that. Like, I mean, another book that I learned a lot from in that exact same way was The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, which has footnotes, exactly like you say, some of which explain stuff like this about like Dominican history. This is an adult book, but some of which explain, you know, like the casual references to Dominican history, they explain it. And some of the footnotes, if I remember right, are in Spanish, not translated. And I read high school Spanish, but like I didn't know what was going on in those footnotes. And it was a really powerful and important experience for me to read that book and feel like, this is not meant for me. And that's okay. You know, and that's the cheerful privilege of the right reader, is to think like, this is not meant for me, or this is everything. The cheerful privilege is to think everything should be for me, and that everything should be edited to serve me. You know, and if it isn't edited to serve me, then it's bad. Like aesthetically, it does not work, or it doesn't make sense, or I mean, you see this sometimes with men and women, like male writers and like male readers saying this book is bad because it's a book written by a woman and it talks about things I don't want to think about, you know, stuff like that. Or female writers who make fun of the way that male writers write women. like with excessive attention to their breasts or whatever. This is all in adult books, more than children's. But yeah, that's the
that, but I know I could think of a few middle grade examples where nope, there it is. There's the male gaze.
Yeah,
right here in our book intended
like,
for 4th and 5th graders.
And so if a male gaze is in a book, or if a man is reading a book and it's all female gaze, then they can be made uncomfortable by that, you know, and be like, this is a bad book. Well, that's the privilege of the male reader, to say like, this is a bad book, even though it's just not a book that is meant for you. And I think all of us as readers could be more thoughtful about what books are meant for us and how we judge books that might not be meant for us, or be open to like what makes good books and what is different, what values we have that are how we define good books. These are questions. I say all this like I have some kind of definitive answers, and I don't. Like basically, like I'm very aware, like especially when I'm editing cross-culturally, like that I am a person who does not have all the answers, and that I need to be humble about that the whole time. Like that's important, to like acknowledge what you do not know, I would say.
So you're editorial director. You've got a list of all the strengths of the different editors that you've got there at your disposal. How do you compensate for that? Because obviously I can't ask you definitively, how do you decide between making sure you're accessible to as many readers as possible and making sure that you're true to the voice of the author? Only you can know that on any individual book. And
Right.
I'm guessing over your career, there's maybe been one or two times where you still aren't sure these many years later. I'm guessing.
Oh, I can tell you about editorial arguments I had 10 years ago. Like, because I mean, I think anything that makes you sort of chew over, am I right or am I wrong, is, I think it's, in my experience, it's both like painful but also a good thing. Like, I think a lot of those things have made me a better human being as well as a better editor. So in terms of compensating editorially, like as editorial director, I think about like what does our list need? You know, what kind of books should we be putting out there that we maybe aren't, and how could I find an editor who would want to do those kind of books? You know, who is passionate about doing science nonfiction? I would love to hire that person, you know, because I can do science nonfiction, and I have, but I won't say it's one of my strengths. And it's something I'd like to learn more about. But there are editors who are like, do amazing science nonfiction, and so that would be a great thing to have on our list, like that sort of thing.